Maggie Hollister pressed her daughter against her chest and felt the child's heartbeat racing as fast as her own. 18 months old, and Rosie already knew fear. The auction platform creaked beneath their feet while men shouted numbers like they were bidding on livestock. Because that's exactly what they were doing. Bidding on her. On them. Then a voice cut through the chaos, low, steady, and cold as mountain ice. $500. Gold. And the next man who bids loses his teeth. This is their story. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The sun hung brutal and unforgiving over Bitter Springs, Wyoming territory on the morning of June 23, 1879. Margaret Hollister, Maggie to anyone who'd ever cared enough to use her name, stood on a wooden platform that still smelled of horse manure and old hay. Her arms ached from holding Rosie for 3 hours straight. The baby had stopped crying an hour ago, too exhausted to fight anymore. Now she just clung to Maggie's dress with tiny fists, her red hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. "Next item," the auctioneer called out. His name was Horace Finch, and Maggie had served him coffee at the boarding house just 6 months ago. He'd tipped his hat to her then, called her ma'am. Now he wouldn't meet her eyes. The guardianship of Mrs. Margaret Hollister and her infant daughter Rosemary. Starting bid is $100. Maggie's jaw tightened. She would not cry. She would not beg. She'd done both already, and it had changed nothing. 100! A voice shouted from the crowd. Maggie found the speaker. Silas Crenshaw. Of course it was Silas Crenshaw. The man who'd held her brother's gambling debts. The man who'd suggested after Patrick died in that bar fight that there were other ways Maggie could pay what was owed. She'd slapped him for that suggestion. Now he was grinning at her from the front row, his yellowed teeth visible even from the platform. 100 to Mr. Crenshaw, Finch announced. Do I hear 120? 120, another voice. Maggie didn't recognize this one a miner by the look of his clothes. Dust-covered, hard-eyed, watching her like she was a horse he was considering for purchase. How old's the baby? Someone called out. Maggie's arms tightened around Rosie. 18 months, Finch answered. Healthy as you can see. And the woman? She healthy too. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Maggie felt her face burn, but she kept her chin up. Let them laugh. Let them bid. She would survive this whatever came next. She had to. For Rosie. The woman is in fine health, Finch said, and Maggie heard the discomfort in his voice. Good. Let him be uncomfortable. Let them all choke on their discomfort while they auctioned off a mother and child like cattle. 150, Crenshaw shouted. 150. Do I hear 175? 175, the miner again. Maggie closed her eyes. The numbers climbed. 175, 200, 225. Each bid was another nail in her coffin, another step toward a future too dark to imagine. She thought about William, her late husband, 20 years her senior, a man she'd married because her brother Patrick had owed him money. William had been kind enough in his distant way. He'd given her Rosie. He'd given her a home, however briefly. And then he'd died of pneumonia last winter, leaving her alone with a baby and a brother who gambled away everything they had. Patrick. Her own blood. He'd put her up as collateral for his debts without telling her. When the creditors came calling after his death, they'd come for her. 250. Crenshaw's voice was getting eager now. 250. Do I hear 275? Silence. Maggie's heart hammered. Crenshaw was going to win. Crenshaw who looked at her like she was meat. Crenshaw who'd made it clear exactly what he expected from any woman under his guardianship. 250 going once. Rosie whimpered against her shoulder. Maggie pressed her lips to her daughter's sweaty hair. I'm sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry. 250 going twice. Maggie looked out at the crowd, at the women who wouldn't meet her eyes, At the men who'd tipped their hats to her on the street just weeks ago. At the preacher standing in the back, hands clasped, doing nothing. At Sheriff Carver, arms crossed, watching the whole thing with an expression of distaste, but making no move to stop it. Sold to $500. The voice came from the back of the crowd, low, steady, cutting through the square like a blade. Everyone turned. Maggie's breath caught. A man stood at the edge of the crowd, one hand resting on the hitching post, the other hooked in his belt. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same stone as the mountains. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, a scar running along his left jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds, cold and assessing as they swept over the platform. 500, he repeated, in gold. The crowd parted as he walked forward, and Maggie noticed the slight hitch in his step. An old injury barely visible, but there if you knew to look. His boots were worn but well maintained. His clothes were plain but clean. Everything about him spoke of a man who'd seen hard times and come through them. Silas Crenshaw stepped into his path. Now hold on just a minute. The bidding was closed. Was it? The stranger's voice didn't rise, didn't change. But something in it made Crenshaw take a step back. Didn't hear the gavel. Crenshaw looked at Finch. Tell him the bidding's done. Finch cleared his throat. Well, technically, I hadn't quite. $500, the stranger said again, and this time he reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He tossed it to Finch, who caught it reflexively. Count it if you want, it's all there. Finch opened the pouch, and his eyes went wide. Gold coins gleamed in the morning sun. More money than most people in Bitter Springs saw in a year. This is highly irregular, Finch stammered. So is selling a woman and her baby like livestock. The stranger's eyes found Maggie for the first time, and she felt the impact of that gaze like a physical blow. There was no lust in his look, no calculation, just a cold, quiet anger that seemed directed at everyone but her. But here we are. You can't just, Crenshaw started. I can. I did. The stranger turned to face him fully, and Maggie saw Crenshaw's hand twitch toward his hip, toward his gun. You want to make something of it? The question hung in the air. The crowd had gone silent. Even Rosie had stopped whimpering as if sensing the tension. Crenshaw's jaw worked. His hand hovered near his holster. The stranger didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there waiting like a man who'd faced worse odds and come out the other side. After a long moment, Crenshaw's hand dropped. This ain't over. It is for today. The stranger turned back to Finch. The money's there, more than twice what he bid. You going to make this legal or not? Finch looked at the gold in his hands, then at Crenshaw, then at the crowd. Maggie could see him calculating the money, the scandal, the path of least resistance. Sold? Finch said finally. I don't believe I caught your name, sir. Hollister. Elijah Hollister. Maggie's world tilted. Hollister. The same name as her dead husband. The same name she'd carried for 2 years. The same name her daughter bore. She stared at the stranger, at Elijah Hollister, and saw something flicker in those storm-gray eyes. Recognition guilt. She couldn't tell. Any relation to William Hollister? Someone in the crowd called out. The rancher what died last winter. Elijah's jaw tightened. No relation that concerns anyone here. But Maggie saw the lie in the slight tension of his shoulders, in the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Well, Mr. Hollister, Finch said, pulling out paperwork with shaking hands. If you'll just sign here, the guardianship will be transferred. I'll sign, but I want it clear in the documents she's not property. She's an employee, housekeeper with wages of $25 a month, full parental rights to her daughter, free to leave whenever she chooses. A murmur ran through the crowd. Finch's pen paused over the paper. That's not standard practice for these arrangements. I don't care about standard practice, I care about what's right. Elijah took the pen from Finch's hand. Write it down, or I'll find a judge who will. Finch wrote, Maggie watched it all happen like she was watching from outside her own body. This stranger, this Hollister, had just paid $500 in gold to buy her freedom, to make her an employee instead of property, to give her rights most women in her situation never received. Why? The question burned in her chest, but she didn't ask it. Not here. Not with the whole town watching. Elijah signed the papers with a quick, efficient hand. Then he turned to the platform and held out his arm. "Ma'am, if you'd care to step down." Maggie's legs felt like water as she descended the platform steps. Rosie stirred against her shoulder, making a small sound of protest. "I've got rooms at the boarding house," Elijah said, his voice pitched low for her ears only. "You and the child can rest there tonight. We'll talk about what comes next in the morning." "Why?" The word escaped before Maggie could stop it. Elijah's expression didn't change. "Because it was the right thing to do." "No." Maggie stopped walking, forcing him to stop too. The crowd was dispersing now, the show over, but she could feel eyes still on them. "That's not an answer. You just paid $500 for a stranger. People don't do that." Something shifted in Elijah's eyes. Something that might have been pain or regret or both. "You're right," he said quietly. "They don't. But you're not a stranger, Mrs. Hollister. Not entirely." Maggie's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" Before he could answer, Silas Crenshaw appeared beside them. His face was flushed with anger, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "This ain't legal," he spat. "She owes me money. Her brother's debts are her debts now, and that means her brother's debts died with her brother." Elijah's voice was flat. "That's the law. The law says a man's debts don't transfer to his sister unless she co-signed. Did she co-sign your agreement with Patrick Brennan?" Crenshaw's face went red. "That's not—" "Did she—" Silence. "I thought not." Elijah stepped closer to Crenshaw, and though his voice didn't rise, something in it made the other man take a step back. "The auction was for debts she inherited from her husband's estate. Those debts are paid now. Anything Patrick Brennan owed you is between you and whatever's left of his soul. You don't know what you're getting into, stranger." "I know exactly what I'm getting into." Elijah's hand moved to rest on his hip just above his holster. "The question is whether you do." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Crenshaw smiled, a cold, ugly thing that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see each other again, Hollister." "I expect we will." Crenshaw turned and walked away, his boots kicking up dust with every angry step. Maggie let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Rosie had started crying again, soft hiccuping sobs against her shoulder. "Come on," Elijah said, his voice gentler now. "Let's get you both somewhere cool." The boarding house was only 2 blocks away, but Maggie felt every step. Her legs were shaking, her arms ached from holding Rosie for so long, and her mind was spinning with questions she didn't know how to ask. Mrs. Porter, who ran the boarding house, met them at the door with wide eyes. "Mr. Hollister, I didn't expect that is. I saw the auction and I thought—" "Mrs. Hollister and her daughter need a room," Elijah interrupted. "Something quiet away from the street, and some food if you have it. She looks like she hasn't eaten in days." Maggie wanted to protest. She didn't need his charity, didn't need him speaking for her, but he was right. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. Of course. Mrs. Porter bustled them inside, shooting curious glances at Maggie and Elijah both. "I have a room on the 2nd floor overlooking the garden. Very peaceful. I'll bring up some stew and bread." The room was small, but clean, with a bed covered in a faded quilt and curtains that blocked most of the afternoon sun. Maggie sank onto the edge of the bed, still clutching Rosie, and watched as Elijah hovered in the doorway, like he wasn't sure if he should enter. "You should put her down," he said. "Rest your arms." "I'm fine." "You're shaking." Maggie looked down at her hands. He was right. She was shaking, fine tremors running through her whole body, the aftermath of fear and adrenaline and too many hours standing in the sun. Carefully, she laid Rosie on the bed. The baby fussed for a moment, then settled, her eyes already drooping closed. Maggie sat there staring at her daughter and felt the tears she'd been holding back all day finally break free. She didn't sob, didn't make a sound, just let the tears roll silently down her cheeks while her shoulders shook. Elijah didn't move from the doorway, didn't offer empty comfort or meaningless words. He just stood there silent and solid, giving her space to fall apart. When the tears finally slowed, Maggie wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked up at him. "William Hollister was your brother." It wasn't a question. Elijah's expression flickered. "Yes." "You lied, out there when they asked." "I didn't lie. I said it wasn't anyone's concern. It isn't." "It's my concern." Maggie's voice cracked. "He was my husband, Rosie's father, and you're her uncle, your family." The word hung in the air between them. Elijah stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I didn't know. About you, about the baby. I left Wyoming 8 years ago after the war. Went to Colorado. Didn't keep in touch with William. Didn't know he'd married. Didn't know he'd died." He paused, his jaw working. "I came back to settle his estate. Found out about the auction this morning." "So you came to what claim your inheritance?" "I came to see what was left of my brother's life." Elijah's eyes met hers, and Maggie saw something raw in them, something broken. "I didn't expect to find his widow being sold like livestock." Maggie's chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell them out there at the auction? Why hide who you are?" Elijah was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to the window and stood there, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "Because if they knew I was William's brother, they'd think I was just protecting family property. They'd think I was claiming you and Rosie as part of his estate." He turned to face her. "I didn't want you to think that. I didn't want anyone to think that." "What do you want me to think?" "That you're free. That I bought your debts, not you. That you can walk out that door tomorrow and never see me again if that's what you want." His voice was steady, but Maggie saw his hands clench at his sides. "I don't expect anything from you, Mrs. Hollister. Not gratitude, not obedience, not anything you're not willing to give." Maggie stared at him. This man, this stranger who shared her name, who'd paid a fortune to save her, was offering her something no one had offered in years. Choice. "And if I choose to stay?" Something flickered in Elijah's eyes. "Then I've got a ranch that needs work, a cabin that's been empty too long, and a debt to my brother that I can never repay, but I can try by making sure his wife and daughter are safe." A knock at the door made them both turn. Mrs. Porter entered with a tray of food, steaming stew, fresh bread, a pitcher of water. "I'll leave you to eat," Elijah said, already moving toward the door. "Rest tonight. We'll talk more in the morning." "Mr. Hollister." "Why?" He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Eli," Maggie said. "If you're going to be my employer, you might as well call me Maggie, and I'll call you Eli." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Fair enough, Maggie." Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Maggie sat on the bed, her sleeping daughter beside her, a bowl of hot stew in her hands, and tried to make sense of the day. This morning, she'd been standing on an auction block, certain her life was over. Now, she was sitting in a clean room, with food in front of her, offered a job and a home by a man who claimed to want nothing from her. A man who'd lied about who he was. A man who'd paid $500 to save a stranger. A man with shadows in his eyes and secrets in his past. She should be grateful. She was grateful. But she was also suspicious and tired and scared in ways that had nothing to do with the auction and everything to do with trusting someone new. Because the last time she'd trusted a man, her brother, he'd sold her to pay his debts. The time before that, her husband, he'd died and left her alone. And now, here was Elijah Hollister offering safety with one hand while hiding the truth with the other. Maggie ate her stew slowly, watching Rosie sleep, and made a decision. She would go with him. To the ranch. To the life he offered. Because she had no other options, and because something in his eyes told her he wasn't lying about wanting to help. But she would keep her guard up. She would watch him carefully. And if she found out he was using Rosie, she would take her daughter and disappear into the mountains before he could stop her. Trust was earned, not given. And Elijah Hollister, whatever his intentions, had a long way to go before he earned hers. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Bitter Springs, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere in the distance, Maggie heard a coyote howl. Tomorrow, she would leave this town that had watched her humiliation without lifting a finger to help. Tomorrow, she would start a new life with a man she barely knew. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for the first time in months, Maggie Hollister closed her eyes without fear and let herself sleep. They left Bitter Springs at dawn. Maggie sat in the wagon bed with Rosie on her lap, watching the town grow smaller behind them. Nobody came to say goodbye. Nobody waved. The people who'd watched her auction just went about their morning business like nothing had happened. Good. She didn't want their goodbyes anyway. Eli drove the wagon in silence, his broad back to her, his shoulders tense under his worn coat. He'd loaded supplies before she'd even woken up: flour, coffee, salt, pork, a bolt of dark blue fabric she didn't remember asking for. "You didn't have to buy all that," Maggie said, after an hour of silence. "Ranch has been empty since William died. Needs restocking." "I meant the fabric." Eli's shoulders shifted. "Figured you might need it. For the baby. Or yourself." Maggie looked down at her dress, the same calico she'd worn to the auction, stained with sweat and tears, and the memory of the worst day of her life. He was right. She did need new clothes. But the fact that he'd thought of it, that he'd noticed— "Thank you," she said quietly. Eli just nodded and kept driving. The road wound up into the foothills, climbing steadily through grassland that gave way to scattered pines. Rosie fell asleep against Maggie's chest, lulled by the wagon's rocking motion, and Maggie found herself watching Eli instead of the landscape. He moved like a man used to pain. Every jolt of the wagon made him shift his weight slightly, favoring his right leg. When he reached for the canteen, she saw the stiffness in his shoulder, the careful way he extended his arm. "You were in the war," she said. Not a question. Most men my age were. Union. Yes. William never talked about the war. Eli's hands tightened on the reins. William wasn't at the front. He had a medical discharge. Bad lungs. "I know. He told me that much." Maggie paused. "He never mentioned having a brother." The silence stretched so long that Maggie thought Eli wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "We weren't close. Not after I enlisted." "Why not?" "Because I left. Because I chose the war over staying home to help with the ranch. Because—" Eli stopped himself. His jaw worked. "Because I made choices William couldn't forgive." "What kind of choices?" Eli turned to look at her for the first time since they'd left town. His eyes were guarded, careful. "The kind that haunt a man, Mrs. Hollister." "Maggie. Maggie." He turned back to the road. "Ask me again sometime. When you know me better. When you've decided if you're staying." It wasn't an answer, but it was honest, and Maggie respected that more than she'd expected. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat. Eli helped Maggie down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist, and she was acutely aware of how long it had been since anyone had touched her with gentleness instead of threat. "There's a creek just through those trees," he said. "Fresh water. I'll watch the baby if you want to wash up." Maggie hesitated. Rosie was awake now, sitting on a blanket Eli had spread on the ground, grabbing fistfuls of grass and trying to eat them. "She doesn't know you." "She will." Eli crouched down beside Rosie, his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey there, little miss. You're a hungry one, aren't you? Eating the whole prairie." Rosie looked up at him with wide eyes. Then to Maggie's shock, she smiled. A real smile, the kind she usually reserved for Maggie alone. Eli smiled back, and the expression transformed his whole face. For just a moment, he didn't look like a haunted soldier or a mysterious stranger. He looked like a man who might have been a father in another life. "Go on," he said to Maggie, not taking his eyes off Rosie. "We'll be fine." Maggie went. The creek was cold and clear, and she knelt beside it, splashing water on her face, scrubbing away the dust and sweat of the journey. Her reflection stared back at her from the water-hollow cheeks, tired eyes, hair coming loose from its pins. She looked like a woman who'd been through hell. Because she had. And she was still going through it, following a stranger into the mountains, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a baby in her arms. But what choice did she have? When she returned, she found Eli sitting cross-legged on the blanket with Rosie in his lap. He was showing her a piece of carved wood, a horse she realized small and delicate and clearly handmade. "Where did you get that?" "Made it." Eli handed the horse to Rosie, who immediately tried to put it in her mouth. "Had time on my hands these past years. Picked up wood carving." "It's beautiful." "It's just a toy." But there was a softness in his voice that belied the dismissal. "She can keep it. Every child should have a horse." Maggie sat down across from him, watching her daughter chew on the carved toy, and felt something shift in her chest. Suspicion, yes, she still had plenty of that. But also something else. Something warmer. "You're good with her." "Had practice. My sister's boys." Eli's expression clouded. "Haven't seen them in years." "Why not?" "Same reason I haven't seen anyone. I left, kept leaving. Couldn't figure out how to come back. Until now." "Until now." His eyes met hers. "Finding out William was dead, it changed things. Made me realize I couldn't keep running forever." Maggie wanted to ask more. About what he was running from. About what had happened in the war. About why a man who carved toys for children lived alone in the mountains like a hermit. But Rosie started fussing, and the moment passed. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting. Maggie's first sight of her new home made her breath catch. Not because it was grand, it wasn't. The cabin was small, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a sagging porch. The barn needed repair. The fence posts were weathered and leaning. But there was something about the way the light hit the valley, the way the mountains rose behind the cabin like protective walls, the way the creek sparkled in the dying sun. "It's not much," Eli said, and she heard the apology in his voice. "It's perfect." He looked at her sharply. "You don't have to say that." "I'm not saying it to be polite." Maggie climbed down from the wagon, Rosie on her hip, and looked around. "My whole life I've lived in other people's houses. My father's. The boarding house where I worked. William's cabin that never felt like mine. This..." She stopped, surprised by the emotion rising in her throat. "This feels like it could be home." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded and started unloading the supplies. The cabin's interior was exactly what Maggie had expected: spare, functional, dusty, from months of neglect. But underneath the dust, she could see the bones of something good. Solid furniture, a well-built fireplace, shelves lined with books, and on the mantel, a photograph. Maggie crossed to it without thinking. Two young men stood side by side, unsmiling, their eyes squinting against the sun. One she recognized, William, younger and healthier than she'd ever known him. The other, "That's you." Eli appeared in the doorway, his arms full of supplies. "Taken before the war. We were still speaking to each other then." "What happened?" "I told you. I left." "That's not the whole story." Eli set the supplies on the table. For a long moment he just stood there, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "I was engaged," he said finally. "To a woman named Sarah. We were supposed to get married after the harvest. But the war came and I enlisted and..." His voice roughened. She died while I was gone. Pneumonia. Her and the baby she was carrying. Maggie's heart clenched. Eli. William blamed me. Said if I'd stayed, if I'd been there to take care of her. He shook his head. Maybe he was right. Maybe if I'd been a better man chosen differently. You can't know that. No, I can't. He turned to face her, and his eyes were raw with old pain. But I've spent 20 years wondering. 20 years running from the question. And now William's dead too, and I never got to... He stopped. His jaw clenched. Never got to what? Maggie asked softly. Make it right. Tell him I was sorry. Tell him I understood why he hated me. Eli's voice was barely above a whisper. He died thinking I didn't care, that I abandoned our family and never looked back. But you did look back. You're here now. Too late. The words were bitter. Always too late. Rosie chose that moment to squirm in Maggie's arms, reaching toward Eli with grabby hands. Without thinking, Eli took her, settling her against his chest with the ease of someone who'd done it 100 times before. She likes you, Maggie said. She doesn't know any better. But Eli was looking at Rosie with something like wonder. She has William's eyes. I know. And your hair. He touched one of Rosie's red curls gently. She's beautiful, Maggie. You've done well with her. The compliment hit Maggie harder than she'd expected. When was the last time anyone had told her she'd done well? When was the last time anyone had seen her as anything other than a burden, a debt, a problem to be solved? I should start supper, she said, her voice thick. If you show me where things are. I'll do it. You've had a long day. Eli, I'm supposed to be your housekeeper. Let me... Tomorrow. Tonight you rest. He handed Rosie back to her. There's a bedroom through that door. Bed's clean, I made sure before we left. Get some sleep, both of you. Maggie wanted to argue, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves, and Rosie was already drooping against her shoulder, and the thought of lying down in a real bed after months of worry and fear was too tempting to resist. Thank you, she said. Eli just nodded and turned to the stove. That night, for the first time since William died, Maggie slept without nightmares. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of an axe biting into wood. Morning light filtered through the curtains, and for a disorienting moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The auction. Eli. The ranch. Rosie was still asleep beside her, sprawled out like a starfish, her red hair a tangle against the pillow. Maggie dressed quickly and quietly, then stepped into the main room. A pot of coffee sat warming on the stove. Beside it, a plate covered with a cloth biscuits she discovered slightly burned but edible. And a note in a rough hand. Gone to check the cattle. Back by midday. Make yourself at home. E. Make yourself at home. Such simple words, such an impossible thing to do. But Maggie tried. She fed Rosie, then explored the cabin while her daughter played on the floor. The kitchen was well stocked now with their supplies. The bedroom she'd slept in had clearly been William's once she found his clothes still in the dresser, his books still on the nightstand. And tucked in the back of a drawer, a stack of letters tied with string. Maggie knew she shouldn't read them. They weren't hers. They were William's private correspondence, his memories, his life before her. But one name caught her eye on the top envelope, and she couldn't help herself. Eli. The letters were old, the paper yellowed with age. The first few were warm, brotherly updates about the ranch, questions about Eli's regiment, wishes for his safe return. But as Maggie read further, the tone changed. I don't understand how you could leave her. Sarah was your responsibility. She's buried next to our parents. You weren't there. You weren't there. Don't write to me again. I have no brother. The last letter was unopened. Eli's handwriting on the front, addressed to William, dated 2 years ago. Whatever Eli had wanted to say, William had refused to hear it. Maggie carefully retied the letters and put them back. Her hands were shaking. 20 years. Eli had spent 20 years carrying the guilt of Sarah's death, and William had never let him forget it. Never given him a chance to make amends. And now William was dead, and Eli was here trying to do for his brother's widow what he couldn't do for his own fiancée. It explained so much. The haunted look in his eyes. The careful distance he kept. The way he'd paid $500 for a stranger's freedom without expecting anything in return. He wasn't trying to buy her. He was trying to buy redemption. The front door opened, and Eli stepped in. His face flushed from work, his shirt damp with sweat. He stopped when he saw Maggie standing there with tears on her cheeks. "What's wrong?" "Is Rosie?" "She's fine. She's playing." Maggie wiped her eyes. "I found William's letters." Eli went very still. "The ones you sent him?" Maggie continued. "And the ones he sent you. I shouldn't have read them. I'm sorry." "No." Eli's voice was rough. "You had a right. He was your husband. He never told me about Sarah, about what happened. Why would he? It wasn't a happy story." "Eli." Maggie crossed to him, stopping just a few feet away. "What happened to Sarah wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. Don't." The word was sharp, almost harsh. "Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. You don't know. You weren't there. Neither were you. That's the point." Maggie took another step closer. "You were fighting a war. You couldn't have been in two places at once. I could have chosen differently. I could have stayed. And done what? Watched her die instead of hearing about it. Would that have been better?" Eli flinched like she'd struck him. "That's not... I know about guilt." Maggie's voice was steady, even though her heart was pounding. "I know about blaming yourself for things you couldn't control. My brother sold me to pay his debts. I spent months wondering what I could have done differently, what I could have said to stop him. But the truth is, I couldn't have stopped him. He made his choice, and I'm not responsible for it." "That's different." "Is it?" Maggie looked up at him, searching his face. "Sarah made a choice too. She chose to wait for you. She chose to carry your child. She didn't know she was going to die. Neither did you. And William. William chose to hate you instead of grieve with you. That's not your fault either." Eli's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "You don't understand. Then help me understand." For a long moment, he just stood there, breathing hard, his fists clenched at his sides. Then slowly the tension drained out of him. His shoulders dropped, his hands uncurled. "I loved her," he said quietly. "Sarah. I loved her more than I knew how to say. And when she died, it felt like the world ended. Like nothing would ever be right again. I know that feeling. Do you..." His eyes searched her face. "Did you love William like that?" The question hung between them. Maggie could have lied. Could have told him what he probably expected to hear, that yes, she'd loved her husband desperately, that his death had shattered her. But she was tired of lies. Tired of pretending. "No," she said. "I married William because my brother owed him money. I cared for him. I was grateful to him. But I never loved him. Not the way you loved Sarah." Eli was quiet for a long moment. "Does that make you feel guilty?" "Every day." Maggie's voice caught. "He deserved better than a wife who couldn't love him. Rosie deserved a father who was loved. But I couldn't make myself feel something that wasn't there." "That's not your fault either, Maggie." She looked up at him, surprised. "What?" "You can't control what you feel. You can only control what you do." Eli's voice was gentle now, the harshness gone. "You stayed with him. You cared for him when he was sick. You gave him a daughter. That's not nothing." "It feels like nothing." "It's not." He took a step closer, then stopped himself. "William was a hard man. Cold. I knew that even when we were boys. The fact that you tried that counts for something. Maggie felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. Why are you being so kind to me? Because somebody should have been kind to you a long time ago. Eli's jaw tightened. From what I can see, you've spent your whole life being used by people who should have protected you. Your brother, the town, even William in his way. You deserve better than that. You don't know me. I know enough. His eyes held hers. I know you stood on that platform with your chin up when anyone else would have broken. I know you're here in a strange place with a strange man trying to build a life for your daughter. I know you found out I lied about who I was, and instead of running, you stayed. I didn't have anywhere else to go. You could have tried. You could have taken the money I gave you and disappeared. But you didn't. Eli's voice dropped. Why not? Maggie didn't have an answer. Or rather, she had one, but it scared her too much to say out loud. She was saved from responding by Rosie's sudden wail from the bedroom. Maggie turned toward the sound, grateful for the interruption. I should go. I'll start on the barn roof. She was halfway to the bedroom when his voice stopped her. Maggie. She turned back. I'm glad you stayed. 4 words. Simple, quiet. But they hit Maggie like a wave, and she found herself blinking back tears for what felt like the 100th time that morning. I'm glad I stayed too, she whispered. Then she went to her daughter, and Eli went to his work, and the cabin settled into something that almost felt like peace. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Eli worked outside fixing the barn, mending fences, tending to the horses and cattle. Maggie worked inside cooking, cleaning, washing, making the cabin feel less like a tomb and more like a home. They ate meals together. They talked carefully at first, then more freely as the days passed. Eli told her about his years in Colorado, about the silver mining that had given him his savings, about the quiet life he'd built alone in the mountains. Maggie told him about Boston, about her father's tailoring shop, about the dreams she'd had before life had beaten them out of her. And Rosie? Rosie thrived. She toddled around the cabin on unsteady legs, grabbing at everything within reach. She laughed when Eli made faces at her. She cried when he left in the morning and squealed with joy when he returned. She's getting attached, Maggie said one evening, watching Eli bounce Rosie on his knee. Is that bad? I don't know. Maggie hesitated. What happens when we leave, when I've saved enough to start over somewhere else? Eli's hands stilled on Rosie's waist. Is that what you're planning to leave? I don't know what I'm planning. I don't know anything anymore. Maggie looked down at her hands. A month ago I was being sold at auction. Now I'm living in those mountains with a man I barely know, pretending like everything's normal. Nothing about this is normal. No, Eli agreed. It's not. He was quiet for a moment then. But does it have to be normal to be good? Maggie looked up at him. What do you mean? I mean. He shifted Rosie to his other knee, his eyes on Maggie's face. My whole life I've done what was expected, what was normal, and it brought me nothing but grief. Maybe normal isn't the goal. Maybe the goal is just finding something that works, something that makes you happy. Are you happy here, Eli? The question surprised him. She could see it in the way his eyebrows lifted, the way his mouth opened slightly before closing again. I don't know if I know how to be happy anymore, he said finally. But I'm less unhappy than I've been in 20 years. That's something. That's something, Maggie agreed softly. Rosie chose that moment to grab Eli's nose and squeeze. He yelped, and Maggie laughed a real laugh, surprised out of her. And for just a moment, they were a family. Not because of blood or law, but because of this small moment of shared joy. Then Rosie sneezed directly in Eli's face, and the moment dissolved into chaos and cleanup and all the mundane business of living. But Maggie held on to it, that feeling, that glimpse of something that might be happiness. She was starting to think she'd been wrong about Eli, wrong about his motives, wrong about what he wanted from her. Maybe, just maybe, he wanted the same thing she did: a home, a family, a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, they could find it together. The fourth morning, Maggie woke to the sound of horses. Not Eli's horses. These hoofbeats were different, heavier, more numerous. Coming fast up the mountain road. She was out of bed and reaching for Rosie before she fully understood why she was afraid. Some instinct honed by months of being hunted told her that whatever was coming wasn't good. "Eli," she called, but he was already there, appearing in the doorway with his rifle in his hands. "Take Rosie into the bedroom," he said, his voice calm but tight. "Stay there until I tell you it's safe." "Who is it?" Eli looked at her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "Crenshaw." Maggie grabbed Rosie and ran. The bedroom door barely closed behind her before she heard the horses pull up outside. Men's voices rough and loud, and then Crenshaw's voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Hollister, get out here!" Maggie pressed her back against the wall. Rosie clutched tight against her chest. Her daughter whimpered, sensing her fear, and Maggie clamped a hand gently over her mouth. "Shh, baby girl, shh." Through the thin walls, she heard the front door open, heard Eli's boots on the porch. "Crenshaw, long way from town." "Had business in these parts." Crenshaw's voice was oily confident. "Figured I'd pay a social call." "You brought 6 men for a social call. Man can't be too careful. Lot of dangerous folk in these mountains." Maggie's heart hammered. 6 men. Eli was alone. She looked around the bedroom, frantically searching for something, a weapon, a way out, anything. Her eyes landed on the window. "What do you want?" Eli's voice was flat, controlled. "Same thing I wanted in town. The woman." "She's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, Hollister. You just haven't heard the right price yet." Maggie moved to the window, testing it with one hand. It opened silently. She could fit through. She could take Rosie and run into the trees, hide until the auction was legal, Eli said. "I paid her debts. She's free." "Her brother's debts weren't part of that auction." Crenshaw's voice hardened. "Patrick Brennan owed me $300. That debt transfers to his next of kin." "His next of kin is dead." "Patrick's dead. The debt dies with him." "Not according to my lawyer." Maggie froze. "Lawyer." "I had papers drawn up," Crenshaw continued. "Signed before Patrick's unfortunate accident. See, Patrick was a gambling man, liked to bet more than he had, and when he couldn't pay, he signed over his assets." "His assets?" "His sister." The word dripped from Crenshaw's mouth like poison. "Legal guardian rights transferred to me in the event of his death or inability to pay. It's all right here." Maggie's blood went cold. Patrick had signed her over. Her own brother had sold her before he even died. "That document is worthless," Eli said, but there was tension in his voice now. "She's a grown woman. She can't be transferred like property." "A widow with a child, no income, no family, courts have ruled on less." Crenshaw laughed. "Face it, Hollister. You bought damaged goods. That woman belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to anyone." "Then let her speak for herself. Bring her out here. Let's see what she wants." Maggie's hand tightened on the window frame. She could still run. She should run. Take Rosie and disappear into the mountains before Crenshaw could. "Maggie stays inside." Eli's voice was steel. "You want to talk to her? You go through me." "That can be arranged." Maggie heard the click of a gun being cocked. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Eli said calmly. "This rifle's aimed at your chest. Your boys might get me after, but you'll be dead before you hit the ground." Silence stretched. Maggie barely breathed. Then Crenshaw laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "You've got nerve, Hollister. I'll give you that." The laugh died. "But nerve doesn't change the law. I've got papers. You've got nothing but a woman who doesn't belong to you and a ranch that should have been sold off months ago." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means I did my research." Crenshaw's voice was smug, now satisfied. William Hollister died without a will. No wife, no children. At least none that the courts knew about until recently. His estate should have gone to auction. Would have too if someone hadn't convinced the bank to hold off. Maggie's mind raced. William's estate. The ranch. If William died without a will, then who convinced them? Eli asked. Some lawyer from Colorado, acting on behalf of William's only living relative. Crenshaw paused. His brother, Elijah Hollister. The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. His brother. She'd known. She'd known since she found the letters, but hearing it spoken out loud, hearing Crenshaw use it as a weapon. So here's what I figure, Crenshaw continued. You came back to claim your brother's ranch, found out his widow was about to be auctioned off, saw a chance to get everything, the land, the cattle, and the woman. All nice and legal. That's not, isn't it? Crenshaw's voice sharpened. You paid $500 for her, Hollister. $500 in gold. That's a lot of money for a stranger. But for your brother's widow, for the woman who comes with the ranch, you've been trying to claim for months. Maggie's legs went weak. She leaned against the wall, her mind spinning. Was it true? Had Eli bought her just to strengthen his claim to William's estate? Had everything he said about wanting to help her, about caring for her, and Rosie been a lie? You don't know what you're talking about, Eli said, but his voice had changed. There was something in it that Maggie hadn't heard before. Desperation. I know enough, and so will the judge when I present my case. Crenshaw's voice turned conciliatory, almost friendly. But it doesn't have to go that far. Give me the woman. Walk away from the ranch, and we'll call it even. Go to hell. Think about it, Hollister. You can't win this. I've got papers, I've got witnesses, I've got money for lawyers. What do you have? A questionable claim and a widow you can't legally protect. I have a rifle, and I'm not afraid to use it. You'd shoot an unarmed man in front of witnesses. That's murder, Hollister. They'd hang you for it. Maybe, but you'd still be dead. The silence stretched. Maggie strained to hear her heart pounding so loud she was sure they could hear it outside. Then footsteps, boots on packed earth, moving away. This isn't over, Crenshaw called. I'll be back with the sheriff, with a court order, and when I do, that woman is coming with me. She'll be gone before you get back. Then I'll find her. I always find what belongs to me. Horses. The sound of men mounting up, of hooves pounding away down the mountain road. And then silence. Maggie sank to the floor, Rosie still clutched against her chest. Her whole body was shaking. Her mind was chaos, fear, and anger and betrayal all tangled together until she couldn't separate them. The bedroom door opened. Eli stood there, rifle still in his hands, his face pale and drawn. Maggie? Is it true? The words came out harsh, accusing. Eli flinched. Is what true? What he said. About the ranch. About your claim. Maggie looked up at him, her eyes burning. Did you buy me to strengthen your inheritance? No. The word was immediate, forceful. Maggie, no. That's not... Then why didn't you tell me? She struggled to her feet, Rosie whimpering against her shoulder. You said you didn't know about me, about Rosie, but you had a lawyer contact the bank months ago. You knew William was dead. You knew there was an estate to claim. I didn't know about you. How can I believe that? How can I believe anything you say? Eli set the rifle against the wall and took a step toward her. Maggie took a step back. Don't. He stopped. His hands dropped to his sides. I hired that lawyer 2 years ago, he said quietly. When I first heard William was sick, I wanted to reach out, make things right, but I was a coward. I kept putting it off, and then he died and... His voice broke. The lawyer handled the estate because I couldn't face it. I didn't know what William had, didn't know who he'd married, Didn't know anything except that my brother was dead, and I'd never get to apologize. But you came back. You came to claim what was his. I came to bury him. Eli's eyes were bright. I came to stand at his grave and say goodbye. The ranch, the cattle, the money, I don't care about any of it. I never did. Then why did you buy me? The question hung in the air. Eli's jaw tightened. Because I saw you standing on that platform, and I saw Sarah. Maggie went still. She was alone when she died. Eli continued, his voice rough. Alone and scared and waiting for me to come home, and I wasn't there. I couldn't save her. He looked at Maggie with something raw and broken in his eyes. When I saw you holding Rosie, when I saw those men bidding on you like you were nothing, I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't watch another woman be destroyed because I did nothing. So this is about guilt, about making yourself feel better. Yes. The admission was stark honest. At first, but Maggie... He took a breath. These past weeks watching you with Rosie, talking to you, being with you, it stopped being about Sarah. It stopped being about guilt. It started being about you. What does that mean? It means I care about you. His voice cracked. Not because of William, not because of Sarah, not because of anything except who you are. I care about your laugh and your stubbornness and the way you hum when you think nobody's listening. I care about Rosie and the way she reaches for me when I come through the door. I care about... He stopped, his hands clenching. I care about you, Maggie, and I know I have no right to. I know I lied. I know you have every reason not to trust me, but it's the truth. Maggie stared at him. Her heart was racing, her thoughts tangled in knots. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to run into his arms and let him hold her and tell her everything would be all right. But another part, the part that had been betrayed too many times, hurt too deeply. That part couldn't let go. I need to leave, she said. Eli's face went pale. Maggie, please. I need to think. I can't think here with you with... She gestured helplessly. Crenshaw is going to come back, with the sheriff with papers, and I don't know what's true anymore. I don't know who to trust. You can trust me. Can I? Maggie's voice broke. My brother sold me. My husband's brother bought me. Everyone in my life has used me for their own purposes. How am I supposed to believe you're any different? Because I'm telling you the truth. The truth you hid for weeks. Eli had no answer for that. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, defeat written in every line of his body. The Redbirds, Maggie said. Martha and Samuel. You mentioned them. How far is their farm? About 6 miles east. But Maggie, I'm going there, tonight. She shifted Rosie to her other hip. I need time to think. Away from you, away from this. Crenshaw. Can't touch me if he doesn't know where I am. She met Eli's eyes. I'm not running from you. I need space. Do you understand? Eli was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. I'll take you. It's not safe alone. No, I need to do this myself. At least take the horse. The bay mare, she's gentle. You can ride her. Maggie hesitated. She'd never been a confident rider. But walking 6 miles through the mountains with a baby in her arms, all right. An hour later, Maggie sat on the bay mare, Rosie strapped to her chest with a length of cloth, a bag of supplies tied to the saddle. Eli stood beside them, his hand on the horse's bridle. The trail's well marked, he said. Follow the creek until you hit the big pine with the lightning scar. Turn left there, and the Redbird place is about 2 miles on. I'll find it. Maggie. His hand came up, almost touching her knee, then dropped. Whatever you decide, whatever you think of me, know that I meant what I said. Every word. Maggie looked down at him. At this man who'd saved her and lied to her and might love her, she still couldn't tell which was true. "I'll send word when I'm ready to talk." She kicked the mare into motion and didn't look back. The ride was harder than she'd expected. Rosie fussed and squirmed, unhappy with the jostling. The trail twisted through dense woods, and twice Maggie lost her way before finding the creek again. But she made it. Martha Redbird came running when she saw Maggie approaching, her round face creased with concern. "Mrs. Hollister, what on earth? Come inside, come inside. You look half dead." Maggie let herself be pulled into the warm kitchen. Let Martha take Rosie from her aching arms. Let the older woman press a cup of hot tea into her hands. "What happened?" Martha asked, settling across from her with Rosie on her lap. "Where's Eli?" The whole story poured out. The auction, Eli's secret, Crenshaw's threats, the papers Patrick had signed. By the end, Maggie was crying again, tears she couldn't seem to stop. Martha listened without interrupting. When Maggie finally fell silent, she sighed heavily. Men, always making things more complicated than they need to be. "I don't know what to do," Maggie whispered. "I don't know who to trust." "Let me ask you something." Martha leaned forward, her dark eyes shrewd. "In all the time you've spent with Eli, did he ever hurt you? Threaten you? Make you feel unsafe?" "No." "Did he treat you with respect? Give you choices?" "Yes." "Did he seem like a man who was using you, or like a man who was trying to make up for something he did wrong?" Maggie was quiet. She thought about Eli's patience, his gentleness with Rosie, the way he'd stepped back whenever she asked him to. "The second one," she admitted. "Then maybe that's your answer." Martha bounced Rosie on her knee. "I'm not saying he was right to hide who he was. But people aren't simple, Mrs. Hollister. They do wrong things for right reasons and right things for wrong reasons, and sometimes they're just stumbling around in the dark trying their best. How do I know his best is good enough? You don't. That's the gamble of trusting anyone." Martha smiled sadly. "But I've known Eli Hollister for 5 years, since he first came through this territory. He's not a bad man, broken maybe, carrying more guilt than one person should have to bear. But bad, no." Samuel came in then, stomping mud off his boots. His weathered face creased with concern when he saw Maggie. "Trouble?" "Crenshaw," Martha said grimly. "He's after Mrs. Hollister." Samuel's expression darkened. "That snake. He's been trying to run us off our land for years. Says a half-breed's got no right to property." "He has papers," Maggie said. "Claims my brother signed me over before he died." "Papers can be forged or invalidated." Samuel pulled a chair over and sat down. "I've dealt with men like Crenshaw before. They use the law like a weapon, counting on folks being too scared or too poor to fight back. I don't have money for lawyers. You might not need one. Not if we can prove the papers are fraudulent." Samuel exchanged a look with his wife. "There's a judge in Helena. Fair man. Doesn't care much for Crenshaw's type. If we could get your case in front of him. Helena's a week's ride. Less if you take the mountain pass." Samuel leaned forward. "But first we need to know what we're dealing with. Those papers Crenshaw mentioned, have you seen them?" Maggie shook her head. "Then that's the first step. Find out what he actually has." Samuel's jaw set. "And find out if Eli Hollister is willing to fight for you. Because if he is, if he'll put his name and his claim behind yours, Crenshaw might back down without a court battle." "I don't know if I can ask him to do that." "Why not?" "Because I don't know if I can trust him." Martha reached across the table and took Maggie's hand. "Sometimes trust isn't about knowing, it's about choosing." Her grip was warm, steady. "You've got a choice to make, Mrs. Hollister. You can keep running like you've been doing your whole life, or you can stand and fight with whatever allies you've got. Even allies who've lied to me, especially those." Martha's eyes were kind but firm. "The people who've never lied to you are the ones who've never had anything to lose. Eli lied because he was scared of losing you. That's not nothing. Maggie stayed with the Redbirds for 3 days. She helped Martha with the cooking and the garden. She played with Rosie in the afternoon sun. She talked with Samuel about the law, about property rights, about what it would take to fight Crenshaw. And she thought. Endlessly obsessively, she thought about Eli, about the way he looked at her, the way he held Rosie, the way he'd stood on that porch with a rifle in his hands and told Crenshaw that she was free. On the third night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the stars and tried to sort through the tangle of her feelings. She was angry. That much was clear. Angry at Eli for lying, angry at Patrick for selling her, angry at a world that treated women like property to be bought and traded. But underneath the anger was something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. What if Martha was right? What if Eli's lies came from fear, not malice? What if he really did care about her, messy, imperfect, complicated as that care might be? Was she willing to throw that away, to keep running, keep protecting herself, keep choosing loneliness over the risk of being hurt? Rosie stirred in the crib beside her, making soft sounds in her sleep. Maggie looked at her daughter, at this tiny person who depended on her for everything, who deserved a stable home, a family, a future. Could Maggie give her that alone? Could she give her that with Eli? She didn't know. She might never know for certain, but Martha was right about one thing. Trust was a choice, and Maggie was tired of choosing fear. The next morning, she told Samuel she was ready to go back. "Want me to ride with you?" he offered. "No, this is something I need to do myself." "You're a brave woman, Mrs. Hollister." "I don't feel brave." "Brave people never do." Maggie packed her things, hugged Martha goodbye, and strapped Rosie to her chest. The bay mare was rested and eager to move, prancing impatiently as Maggie mounted. "Remember," Martha called as she rode away, "you're stronger than you know." Maggie hoped she was right. The ride back seemed shorter than the ride out. Maybe because she knew the way now. Maybe because she wasn't running anymore. She was going home. The word surprised her. Home. She'd never had a real home, not since her parents died. But the Hollister Ranch, with its sagging porch and its dusty cabin and its view of the mountains, it felt like home. Despite everything, it felt like where she was supposed to be. She was almost to the ranch when she heard the gunshot. Maggie's heart stopped. She kicked the mare into a gallop, crashing through the underbrush, Rosie wailing against her chest. Another shot, then another. She burst out of the trees and saw the cabin, saw the broken window, the splintered doorframe, the horses scattered in the yard, and she saw Eli crouched behind the water trough, blood streaming down his face, his rifle aimed at the barn where 3 men had taken cover. "Eli!" He whipped around, and the terror in his eyes when he saw her was absolute. "Maggie, run! Get out of here!" But it was too late. A hand grabbed her horse's bridle, yanking her to a stop. Silas Crenshaw looked up at her with a smile that made her blood freeze. "Well, well, the prodigal wife returns." He pulled out a pistol and pressed it against Rosie's blanket. "Let's finish this conversation, shall we?" Maggie's arms tightened around Rosie. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something, but that gun was inches from her daughter's head. "Let her go!" Eli's voice cut across the yard. He'd risen from behind the water trough, his rifle still raised, blood dripping from a gash above his eye. "This is between you and me, Crenshaw. Leave them out of it." "Put down the rifle." "Not a chance." Crenshaw pressed the pistol closer. Rosie started to cry high, terrified wails that shattered something inside Maggie's chest. "Put it down, or I'll paint this baby's blanket red." "You wouldn't?" "Try me." Crenshaw's smile was dead empty. "I've waited too long for this, spent too much money. I'm not leaving here without what's mine." Eli's hands trembled on the rifle. Maggie could see the war playing out across his face, rage and fear and desperate calculation. "Eli," she said quietly, "put it down." His eyes met hers. "Maggie." "Put it down." For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Eli lowered the rifle and set it on the ground. "Kick it away." He kicked it. The rifle skidded across the dirt, coming to rest 10 feet away. Good. Crenshaw's grip on Maggie's bridle relaxed slightly. Now we can talk like civilized people. You call this civilized? Maggie's voice shook with fury. Threatening a baby. I call it effective. Crenshaw looked up at her with cold eyes. Your brother understood that. Patrick knew exactly what leverage meant. Patrick was a coward and a drunk. Patrick was a businessman. Crenshaw's lips curled. He just had bad luck at cards, and when his luck ran out, he did what any smart man would do. He sold what he had. I'm not his to sell. The law says different. The law says nothing of the kind. Eli took a step forward. One of Crenshaw's men raised a pistol and he stopped. Whatever paper you've got, it's not worth the ink it's written on. A man can't sign away his sister's freedom. A man can sign away his guardian rights. And when Patrick died, those rights transferred to me. Crenshaw pulled a folded document from his coat. It's all here, legal and binding, witnessed by 2 upstanding citizens of Bitter Springs. Let me see it. Crenshaw laughed. So you can tear it up? I don't think so. Then show her. Eli's jaw tightened. If you're so confident it's legal, let Maggie read it herself. Crenshaw hesitated. His eyes flickered to Maggie, then back to Eli. Fine. He held the paper up toward her. Read it and weep, sweetheart. Maggie's hands were shaking as she took the document. Rosie was still crying against her chest, but she forced herself to focus on the words. Guardian Transfer Agreement. Patrick Brennan. Silas Crenshaw. The language was dense, full of legal terms she didn't fully understand. But she understood enough. This says Patrick transferred guardianship of his dependents, she said slowly. His dependents. That's you, sweetheart? No. Maggie looked up, and something cold and hard settled in her chest. This document is dated March 15, 1879. I married William Hollister in January of 1877. I haven't been Patrick's dependent for over 2 years. Crenshaw's smile faltered. What? Patrick didn't have guardianship of me, not when he signed this, not ever after my marriage. Maggie's voice grew stronger. Whatever rights he thought he was signing away, he didn't have them to give. That's not... Crenshaw snatched the paper back, his eyes scanning it frantically. She's right. Eli's voice was quiet, dangerous. You paid Patrick for something he didn't own. Whatever he told you, whatever he promised, it was a con. You got played, Crenshaw. No. Crenshaw's face twisted with rage. No. I'm not leaving here empty-handed. I've invested too much. You invested in a lie. That's not her fault. Shut up. Crenshaw raised his pistol toward Eli. Shut your mouth, Hollister, or I'll shut it for you. Go ahead. Eli spread his arms. Shoot me. Then what? You've still got no legal claim. You'll hang for murder and she'll walk free anyway. I'll take her. You'll what kidnap her with witnesses. Eli gestured toward his men. How long do you think they'll stay loyal when they're facing charges too? Maggie saw the doubt flickering across the faces of Crenshaw's hired guns. They exchanged glances, hands tightening on their weapons. Mr. Crenshaw, one of them said slowly, maybe we should... Shut up. Nobody's going anywhere. The lady's right about the dates. Another man spoke up. I saw that paper. If she was married before Patrick signed it. I said shut up. The situation was unraveling. Maggie could feel it, the shift in power, the growing unease among Crenshaw's men. But Crenshaw's pistol was still pointed at Eli, and there was something in his eyes that scared her more than anything else. He wasn't going to back down. He couldn't. He'd staked too much on this. Here's what's going to happen. Crenshaw's voice had gone flat, controlled. The woman comes with me. The baby, too. Hollister stays here. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with my gun. I'm not going anywhere with you. Maggie urged her horse backward. Your paper means nothing. You have no claim. I have this. He raised the pistol. That's all the claim I need. Silas. The new voice came from behind them. Maggie twisted in the saddle and saw riders emerging from the tree line. Samuel Redbird, his rifle raised. Martha beside him, her face grim. And behind them, two other men Maggie didn't recognize. Lower your weapon, Samuel called out. It's over. Crenshaw spun his pistol, swinging toward the new arrivals. Stay out of this, half-breed. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when you threaten my neighbors. Samuel's voice was steady. And when you trespass on land that doesn't belong to you. And when you wave around fake documents trying to steal a woman like it's still the Dark Ages. The document isn't fake. I just heard Mrs. Hollister explain exactly why it is. Samuel nudged his horse closer. So did my friends here, Frank Miller, deputy from Helena, and Judge Warren's clerk. They were visiting when your boys rode past our place. Maggie's breath caught. Deputy. Judge's clerk. Crenshaw's face had gone white. You're bluffing. Try me. Samuel gestured toward the two strangers. These gentlemen came to investigate claims of fraud and intimidation in Bitter Springs. Seems you've made quite a reputation for yourself, Silas. Forging documents, threatening widows, running people off their land. That's lies. All lies. Then you won't mind coming back to town to answer some questions. The man Samuel had called Frank Miller nudged his horse forward. Peaceable-like, unless you'd prefer to do this the hard way. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Crenshaw stood frozen. His pistol still raised his eyes, darting between the armed men surrounding him. Then one of his own men dropped his weapon. I ain't dying for this, the man said, raising his hands. Whatever he's paying, it ain't worth hanging. You coward, Crenshaw started. Another gun hit the dirt. Then another. Crenshaw was alone. His pistol trembled in his hand as he backed toward his horse. This isn't over, he hissed. I'll get lawyers, real lawyers. You'll come with us to town. Frank Miller dismounted and walked toward Crenshaw with the calm confidence of a man who'd done this 100 times before. We can sort out the legal matters later. Right now, you're under arrest for threatening violence and attempted kidnapping. You can't arrest me. You have no jurisdiction. I have jurisdiction everywhere in this territory. Miller pulled out a set of iron cuffs. Now, are you going to come quiet, or do I need to add resisting arrest to the charges? Crenshaw's eyes found Maggie. The hatred in them made her flinch. This isn't over, he said again. You think you've won? You haven't won anything. I'll find a way. I always find a way. Stop talking. Miller cuffed his hands behind his back. You're only making things worse for yourself. As they led Crenshaw away, Maggie finally let herself breathe. Her arms were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Rosie had stopped crying, but was still hiccuping against her chest. Little fingers clutching at Maggie's dress. Hey. She looked up. Eli was beside her horse, his hand reaching up toward her. You should get down. You look like you're about to fall. He was right. Her legs felt like water. She let him help her down, let him steady her when she stumbled. Your head, she said, her voice strange and distant. You're bleeding. It's nothing, just a graze. But his hands on her arms were trembling too. God, Maggie, when I saw him point that gun at Rosie, I know. I thought, his voice broke. I thought I was going to lose you both. Maggie looked up at him, at this man who'd lied to her and saved her and stood between her and danger with nothing but a rifle and stubborn courage. You didn't, she said. We're here. We're safe. Because of the Redbirds. Because of... He shook his head. I couldn't protect you. I tried, and I couldn't. Eli. She put her hand on his chest over his heart. She could feel it racing beneath her palm. "Stop." He stopped. "I didn't come back because I thought you could protect me," Maggie said. "I came back because I chose to. Because Martha was right. Trust is a choice. And I'm choosing to trust you. Even after everything I kept from you. Even after that." She took a shaky breath. "You lied about who you were. You hid things from me. But when it mattered, when Crenshaw was here with his gun and his papers, you stood up for me. You were willing to die for me. That's not—" "Don't." She pressed her fingers against his lips. "Don't tell me it wasn't a big deal. Don't tell me anyone would have done the same. We both know that's not true." Eli's eyes were bright. "Maggie, I spent 3 days at the Redbirds asking myself if I could trust you, if I could believe anything you said." She looked up at him, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she let herself be completely honest. "And I still don't know. Not for sure. I might never know for sure. But I decided that I'd rather take the risk than spend the rest of my life running." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm staying." The words came out steady, certain. "I'm saying I want to make this work. The ranch, the whatever this is between us. I want to try." Eli was quiet for so long that Maggie started to worry she'd misread everything. Then his hands came up to cup her face gentle, as she'd ever felt anything. "You mean that—" "I mean it." He kissed her. It wasn't a long kiss or a passionate one. Rosie was still fussing between them, and they were both shaking with aftermath and relief. But it was real. It was honest. It was a promise. When they pulled apart, Martha Redbird was standing a few feet away, with a knowing smile on her face. "I hate to interrupt," she said, "but we should probably get that head wound looked at. And someone needs to deal with those men in the barn." Reality crashed back in. Maggie stepped back from Eli, her cheeks flushing. "The men in the barn, are they—" "They ran off when they saw us coming," Samuel said, riding over. "Doubt they'll be back. But we should secure the ranch anyway. Make sure nothing's damaged." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Martha tended to Eli's wound while Maggie fed and settled Rosie. Samuel and the other men checked the property, rounded up the scattered horses, fixed what could be fixed. The deputy and the clerk rode off with Crenshaw and his captured men, promising to send word about the legal proceedings. "You'll likely need to testify," Frank Miller told Maggie before he left, "about what happened here and about those papers he was waving around." "Can you do that?" "Yes." Maggie's voice was stronger than she expected. "Whatever it takes." "Good. Judge Warren doesn't take kindly to men who threaten women and children. Crenshaw's going to have a hard time talking his way out of this one." By the time the sun was setting, the ranch was quiet again. The Redbirds had gone home with promises to return the next day. Rosie was asleep in her crib, exhausted from the day's terrors. And Maggie sat on the porch with Eli, watching the stars come out. "I should apologize," Eli said quietly, "for not telling you the truth from the start." "Yes, you should. I'm sorry." He turned to face her. "I was afraid that if you knew I was William's brother, you'd think I only wanted the ranch, that I was using you. I did think that, for a while." "I know." He looked down at his hands. "The truth is, I didn't know what I wanted. Not at first. I came back to settle William's estate, yes, but when I saw you at that auction—" He shook his head. "Everything changed. Suddenly the ranch didn't matter. The inheritance didn't matter. The only thing I could think about was getting you off that platform." "Why?" "Because you were alone." His voice roughened. "Because you were scared and brave at the same time. Because you were holding that baby like she was the only thing in the world worth living for. And because—" He stopped. "Because what?" "Because when I looked at you, I saw someone I wanted to protect. Not out of guilt or obligation, but because—" He met her eyes. "Because something in me recognized something in you. like we'd been through the same fires and come out the other side, like we were both looking for the same thing and didn't know how to ask for it. What thing? A home. The word came out broken. A family. A reason to stop running. Maggie's throat tightened. Eli, I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. But when Crenshaw had that gun on you today, his hands clenched. I knew. Whatever this is, whatever we're building here, I want it. I want to see where it goes. So do I. He looked at her like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. You do. I do. She reached over and took his hand. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not saying I've forgiven everything or that I trust you completely. But I want to try. I want to give us a real chance. Eli's fingers laced through hers. What does that look like, practically speaking? I stay. I keep working as your housekeeper. At least that's what we tell people. She managed a small smile. We take it slow. Get to know each other properly. No more secrets. No more secrets, he agreed. I'll tell you everything. About Sarah, about William, about the war, everything you want to know. And if it works out, if we decide this is real, then we make it official. Eli's voice was steady. Marriage, adoption, the whole thing. I want Rosie to be mine, Maggie. Legally, properly mine. I want to be her father. Tears pricked at Maggie's eyes. She already calls you Papa. Does she? Something soft and wondering crossed his face. I didn't know she'd started talking. She has. Just a few words. Mama? No. And Papa. Maggie squeezed his hand. She knows who you are, Eli, even if the law doesn't say it yet. They sat in silence for a while, hands intertwined, watching the stars wheel overhead. What happens now? Maggie asked finally. With Crenshaw, with the legal case. Miller said he'd send word. We'll probably have to go to Helena at some point, give testimony. Eli paused. But Crenshaw's done. Even if he doesn't go to prison, his reputation is ruined. Nobody in the territory will do business with a man who threatened to shoot a baby. You really think it's over? I think the worst of it is. He turned to look at her. But there's something else we need to deal with. The ranch. William's estate. Maggie's chest tightened. What about it? Legally, as his widow, you have a claim. A stronger one than mine, probably. If you wanted to, I don't want to fight you for it. I'm not asking you to fight me. Eli's voice was gentle. I'm saying we should make it official. Both our names on the deed. Equal partners. So nobody can ever question your right to be here. You do that. It's the right thing to do. He smiled slightly. Besides, if we're going to make this work, if we're going to build a life together, it should be ours. Not mine, not yours. Ours. Maggie felt something crack open in her chest. All her life, she'd been dependent on others. Her father, her brother, her husband. She'd never owned anything. Never had security that couldn't be taken away. And here was this man offering her exactly that. Not as charity, not as payment, as partnership. Yes, she said. Let's do that. Let's make it ours. Eli raised their joined hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Tomorrow, he said. We'll ride to town, talk to the land office, start the paperwork. And tonight? Tonight. He looked at her and something shifted in his eyes. Something warmer, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen. Tonight, I'd like to just sit here with you. If that's all right, just be here, together. That's all right. They stayed on the porch until the moon rose, talking sometimes silent others. Eli told her about the war, about the things he'd seen, the things he'd done, the nightmares that still woke him sweating in the dark. Maggie told him about her parents, about the cholera that took them, about the years of scrambling and surviving that followed. And somewhere in that sharing, something changed between them. The careful distance they'd maintained began to dissolve. The walls they'd both built started to crumble. When Maggie finally rose to go inside, Eli caught her hand. "Maggie." She turned. "Thank you. For coming back. For giving me another chance." His voice was rough with emotion. "I won't waste it, I promise." "I know you won't." She leaned down and kissed him softly, a whisper of a thing, a promise of more to come. "Good night, Eli." "Good night, Maggie." She went inside, checked on Rosie, and climbed into bed. For the first time since she could remember, she fell asleep without fear. Outside, Eli stayed on the porch, watching the stars and thinking about the future. A week ago, he'd been a man with nothing to live for. A ghost haunting his brother's ranch waiting for something to give him permission to stop running. Now he had Maggie. He had Rosie. He had a reason to build instead of just survive. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There would be hard conversations ahead, wounds that needed healing, trust that needed building. But for the first time in 20 years, Eli Hollister felt something he'd thought lost forever. Hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Maggie woke to Rosie's babbling and the smell of coffee drifting through the cabin. She found Eli at the stove, making breakfast with the focused attention he gave to everything. "Pancakes," he said without turning around. "Hope that's all right." "It's perfect." He turned then, and the smile on his face made her heart skip. "Morning." "Morning." They ate together, Rosie in her high chair between them, making a mess of everything she touched. It was messy and loud and chaotic, and Maggie thought she'd never seen anything more beautiful. "Ready to go to town?" Eli asked when the dishes were done. Maggie looked around the cabin, at the home they were building, at the family they were becoming. "Ready," she said. "Let's make it official." They loaded up the wagon, Maggie and Rosie in the back, Eli at the reins. As they started down the mountain road, Maggie felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. 6 months ago, she'd stood on an auction platform, certain her life was over. Now she was riding toward a future she'd never imagined. A future with a man who'd saved her, lied to her, and loved her anyway. A future where her daughter would have a father, a home, a family. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the life she'd dreamed of as a girl. It was better. Halfway to town, Rosie reached out from Maggie's arms toward Eli. "Papa," she said clearly. "Papa." Eli pulled the wagon to a stop. He turned, his eyes bright. "What did she say?" "Papa." Rosie said it again, straining toward him. "Papa, Papa, Papa." Eli's face cracked into the biggest smile Maggie had ever seen. He reached back and took Rosie from her arms, settling the baby on his knee. "That's right, little miss," he said, his voice thick. "That's right. I'm your papa." Maggie watched them, her daughter in the arms of the man she was learning to love, and felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Happy tears. Finally, after everything, happy tears. "Come on," she said, wiping her eyes. "Let's go make it legal." Eli clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving again. And as they rode toward town, toward their future, Maggie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The land office in Bitter Springs was a small building wedged between the bank and the assay office. Maggie had walked past it 100 times during her months in town, never imagining she'd one day stand inside it as anything other than a debtor or a beggar. Now she stood beside Eli, Rosie on her hip, watching the clerk shuffle through papers with ink-stained fingers. "Both names on the deed," the clerk repeated slowly, squinting at Eli. "That's highly unusual, Mr. Hollister. Wives don't generally—" "She's not my wife, not yet." Eli's voice was steady. "She's my partner. Equal share in the ranch, equal say in how it's run." The clerk's eyebrows rose. "That's even more unusual." "I don't care about usual. I care about right." Maggie felt her heart swell. Even now, even after everything, Eli kept surprising her with his quiet insistence on doing the honorable thing. "Well," the clerk cleared his throat. I suppose if you're both willing to sign, there's no legal impediment. Though I should warn you, Mr. Hollister, this could complicate matters if you ever decide to. We won't. Eli took the pen the clerk offered. Where do I sign? They signed the papers together. Maggie's hand trembled slightly as she wrote her name beside Eli's, making it official, making them partners in something more than just a ranch. There. The clerk stamped the document with a flourish. The Hollister Ranch, jointly owned by Elijah Hollister and Margaret Hollister. Congratulations, I suppose. Margaret Hollister. It was still William's name, but it felt different now, like it belonged to her in a way it never had before. Outside, Eli helped her up onto the wagon seat. His hand lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. How does it feel? He asked. Owning something strange. Maggie settled Rosie in her lap. Good, strange. I've never had my name on anything before. Get used to it. Eli climbed up beside her. If I have my way, your name's going to be on a lot of things before we're done. They were crossing the main street when a voice called out behind them. Mrs. Hollister! Mr. Hollister! Maggie turned. Sheriff Boyd Carver was hurrying toward them, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. Got news? Carver said, slightly out of breath. From Helena. About Crenshaw. Eli's jaw tightened. What about him? Trial's set for next month. Judge Warren reviewed the evidence, says it's an open and shut case. Carver pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Forgery, fraud, attempted kidnapping, making violent threats. They're throwing the book at him. Will he go to prison? Maggie asked. 5 to 10 years most likely. Maybe more, depending on what else they find. Carver's expression softened slightly. You won't have to worry about him anymore, ma'am. He's done. The relief hit Maggie like a wave. She'd been carrying the fear of Crenshaw in her chest for so long, she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. There's something else, Carver said, lowering his voice. The judge asked me to look into those papers Crenshaw was waving around. The ones your brother supposedly signed. And forgeries. All of them. Carver shook his head. Patrick Brennan never signed anything over to Crenshaw. The whole thing was a con from the start. Crenshaw just figured a desperate widow wouldn't have the resources to fight back. He figured wrong, Eli said quietly. That he did. Carver tipped his hat. You folks take care now. And if you need anything, my office is always open. They watched him walk away. Maggie felt Eli's hand cover hers on the wagon seat. It's really over, she said. Isn't it? It's over. Eli squeezed her fingers. No more looking over your shoulder. No more waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're free, Maggie. Truly free. Free. Such a small word for such a big feeling. They stopped at the general store for supplies. Maggie was examining a bolt of yellow fabric, bright and cheerful, perfect for curtains, when she heard whispers behind her. That's her. The one from the auction. I heard she's living with that Hollister man, the brother. Scandalous, if you ask me. A widow living with an unmarried man. Maggie's spine stiffened. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of two women she vaguely recognized. Church ladies. The kind who'd watched her auction without lifting a finger. Can I help you? She asked coldly. The women had the grace to look embarrassed. One of them, gray-haired, pinch-faced, cleared her throat. We were just saying, Mrs. Hollister, that it's good to see you looking well, after everything that happened. Everything that happened. Maggie's voice was flat. You mean the auction? The one where you stood in the crowd and watched men bid on me like I was livestock. Now there's no need to. There's every need. Maggie took a step toward them, and both women backed up. You could have spoken up. You could have helped. But you didn't. You just watched. The law. The law allowed it. It didn't require it. Maggie felt years of anger rising in her chest. You made a choice that day. You chose to do nothing. And now you want to whisper about me behind my back. Judge me for who I live with. The gray-haired woman's face had gone red. "I never— Save it." Maggie turned back to the fabric, dismissing them. "I don't need your approval. I don't need anything from people who wouldn't help me when I was desperate but have plenty to say now that I'm standing on my own feet." She felt Eli's presence behind her before he spoke. "Everything all right?" "Fine." Maggie picked up the yellow fabric. "I want this one, for the kitchen windows." Eli glanced at the retreating women, then back at Maggie. A small smile tugged at his mouth. "You're something else, you know that. I'm tired of being small." Maggie met his eyes. "Tired of apologizing for existing. Tired of letting people who've never helped me have opinions about my life." "Good." Eli took the fabric from her hands. "Then let's give them something to really talk about." "What do you mean?" "I mean—" He paused, something shifting in his expression. "I mean, I've been thinking. About us. About what comes next." Maggie's heart stuttered. "And— not here." Eli glanced around the store. "Tonight, on the porch, there's something I need to ask you." The rest of the day passed in a blur of anticipation. They bought their supplies loaded, the wagon started the long ride home. Maggie tried to focus on Rosie on the familiar rhythm of travel, but her mind kept circling back to Eli's words. "Something I need to ask you." She knew what it was. Had to be. But knowing didn't stop her heart from racing every time she thought about it. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting. Eli helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "Get Rosie settled," he said. "Then come outside. I'll be on the porch." Maggie fed Rosie, changed her, sang her the lullaby that always put her to sleep. Her hands were shaking the whole time. "This is ridiculous," she told herself. "You're a grown woman. You've been married before. This shouldn't feel so terrifying." But it did, because this was different. This wasn't a marriage of convenience or desperation. This was a choice, her choice. She found Eli on the porch, sitting on the top step, looking out at the mountains. He stood when he saw her. "Maggie." "Eli." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something electric. "I had a speech prepared," Eli said finally. "Spent all day working on it in my head. But now that you're here—" He shook his head. "I can't remember a word of it." "Then don't give a speech." Maggie stepped closer. "Just say what you need to say." Eli reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A ring. Simple gold with a tiny blue stone that caught the last light of day. "This was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to me before I enlisted. Told me to give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Maggie's breath caught. "I was supposed to give it to Sarah, but I kept putting it off, kept telling myself there'd be time later. And then—" His voice roughened. "There wasn't. Eli, I'm not making that mistake again." He took her hand, pressed the ring into her palm. "I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other. I know there are 100 reasons why this is crazy, but I don't care about any of that." "What do you care about?" "You." The word came out raw, honest. "I care about you, Maggie. About Rosie. About building something together that neither of us could build alone." He dropped to one knee, and Maggie felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Margaret Hollister, I'm not a perfect man. I've made mistakes. I've got scars inside and out. I still have nightmares, and I still wake up some mornings not sure if I deserve to be happy. Eli. But when I'm with you—" His voice cracked. "When I'm with you, I want to try. I want to believe that maybe the past doesn't have to define the future, that maybe two broken people can build something whole." He looked up at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Will you marry me, Maggie? Will you let me be your husband and Rosie's father and whatever else you need me to be for the rest of our lives?" Maggie stared down at him, at this man who'd saved her and lied to her and loved her through it all. And she knew with a certainty that went deeper than thought what her answer was. "Yes." The word came out as a whisper, then stronger. Yes, yes, Eli. I'll marry you. He was on his feet in an instant, pulling her into his arms, kissing her with all the desperation and joy of a man who'd finally found what he'd been searching for. Maggie kissed him back, her arms around his neck, the ring clutched in her fist, and felt something click into place in her chest. Something that had been broken for so long she'd forgotten it was supposed to be whole. I love you, she said against his lips. I should have said it before. I was scared. But I love you, Eli. I think I've loved you since you stood on that auction platform and told Crenshaw you'd take his teeth. Eli laughed a real laugh, full and warm. That's when you fell in love with me. When I threatened violence. You threatened violence on my behalf. There's a difference. He pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. I love you too. God, Maggie. I love you so much it scares me. Don't be scared. She covered his hands with hers. We're going to be all right. I know we are. They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, talking and kissing and making plans. A small wedding, they decided. Just them and the Redbirds and whoever else wanted to come. And after that, the adoption. Making Rosie legally Eli's daughter. I want to do it right, Eli said. The ceremony. The papers, all of it. So do I. Maggie leaned against his shoulder. I've never had a real wedding. With William, it was just signing papers at the courthouse. I always wanted, what did you want? Flowers. She felt foolish saying it. A dress that wasn't borrowed. Someone looking at me like... She stopped. Like what? Like I was the most important person in the world. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then, you'll have flowers and a dress, and I'll look at you like that every day for the rest of our lives, because you are Maggie. You're the most important person in my world. They were married 2 weeks later. The ceremony was small, held in the meadow behind the cabin. Martha Redbird had helped Maggie sew a dress from the yellow fabric, not traditional, but bright and hopeful, like the future they were building. Wildflowers grew everywhere, and Maggie carried a bouquet of them down the makeshift aisle. Eli stood waiting for her in his best suit, the one he'd worn to his brother's funeral. But there was nothing mournful in his expression now. He looked at Maggie like she was the sun coming up after a long, dark night. Reverend Peters from town performed the ceremony. He'd been at the auction too, another one who'd done nothing, but he'd come to the ranch a few days later, hat in hand, to apologize. I was wrong, he'd said. I should have spoken up. I let fear of the law override what I knew was right. I'd like the chance to make it up to you if you'll let me. Maggie had let him. Because holding on to anger took energy she didn't have anymore, and because she was learning that people could change, could grow, could become better than their worst moments. Do you, Elijah Hollister, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Eli's voice was steady, sure. And do you, Margaret Hollister, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Maggie looked at Eli, at the man who'd ridden into her life on a dusty afternoon and changed everything. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Eli kissed her long and deep, and the small crowd cheered. Martha was crying. Samuel was grinning. Even the Reverend looked moved. And Rosie, held in Martha's arms, clapped her hands and shouted, "Papa, Mama, kiss!" Everyone laughed. Eli swept Rosie up, holding her between them as they kissed again. Our family, Maggie whispered. We're really a family now. We always were. Eli's voice was thick. This just makes it official. The celebration afterward was simple but perfect. Martha had made a cake. Samuel brought fiddle music. People danced and laughed and ate until the sun went down. Maggie watched it all from Eli's side, her husband's arm around her waist, her daughter playing with the Redbird grandchildren, and felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Happy? Eli asked softly. More than I've ever been." She leaned into him. "I didn't know it could feel like this. I didn't know life could be this good." "It can be. It will be." He kissed her temple. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure of it." The adoption hearing was held a month later in Helena. They'd made the trip together, all three of them staying at a boarding house that was nicer than anything Maggie had experienced in years. Eli had insisted on paying for a proper room with a real bed and clean sheets and a cradle for Rosie. "We're not poor," he'd reminded her gently. "The silver investments, the ranch were comfortable, Maggie. You don't have to pinch pennies anymore." It was still hard to believe. Hard to accept that the desperate scarcity she'd lived with for so long was truly over. The hearing itself was brief. Judge Warren, the same judge who'd sentenced Crenshaw to 8 years in prison, reviewed the paperwork with a kind smile. "So you wish to legally adopt the child Rosemary Hollister?" "Yes, Your Honor." Eli stood straight, his voice clear. "I want her to be my daughter in every sense. My name on her birth record. My responsibility for her welfare. Everything." "And you, Mrs. Hollister? You consent to this adoption?" "I do." Maggie squeezed Eli's hand. "He's been her father in everything but name since the day we met. I want the law to recognize what my heart already knows." The judge nodded slowly. "I've reviewed the circumstances of your situation. The auction, the threats from Mr. Crenshaw, the way Mr. Hollister stepped in to protect you and the child." He looked at Eli with something like respect. "It's not often I see someone risk so much for strangers." "She's not a stranger," Eli said. "She's my wife. And Rosie's not a stranger either. She's my daughter." "So she is." Judge Warren signed the papers with a flourish. "It is hereby ordered that the child Rosemary, formerly of William Hollister deceased, is now legally and fully the child of Elijah Hollister. All rights, responsibilities, and privileges of parenthood are transferred accordingly." He looked up at them with a genuine smile. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Hollister. May your family know nothing but happiness." Outside the courthouse, Eli held Rosie in his arms, tears streaming down his face. "She's mine," he kept saying. "She's really mine. She's always been yours." Maggie put her arms around them both. "The paper just makes it harder for anyone to argue." Rosie grabbed Eli's nose, her favorite game, and giggled. "Papa cry," she observed. "Happy tears, little miss." Eli kissed her forehead. "Papa's crying happy tears." They walked through Helena that afternoon as a family. Eli bought Rosie a new dress. Maggie found a bookshop and lost herself in it for an hour, while Eli entertained their daughter. They ate dinner at a restaurant with real tablecloths and candles, and Rosie charmed every server who came to their table. "This is what life is supposed to feel like," Maggie said as they walked back to the boarding house. "Normal, happy, safe. Get used to it." Eli shifted Rosie to his other arm. "Because this is your life now. Our life." That night after Rosie was asleep, Maggie lay in Eli's arms and let herself believe it. She was safe. She was loved. She had a home, a husband, a daughter who was legally permanently hers. No one could take it away. No one could auction her off or threaten her children or make her feel like property ever again. "What are you thinking?" Eli murmured against her hair. "That I'm grateful. For you. For everything." "I'm the grateful one." His arms tightened around her. "You gave me a reason to live again, Maggie. You and Rosie. I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. Now I wake up every morning actually looking forward to the day. Even when Rosie cries at 3 in the morning, even then." He laughed softly. "Although I won't pretend I don't appreciate when she sleeps through the night." They lay in comfortable silence for a while. Then Maggie said quietly, "I want more." Eli went still. "More what?" "More children." The words came out in a rush. "I know it soon. I know we've barely started, but I want Rosie to have siblings. I want a big family like the one I never had. I want—" Eli silenced her with a kiss. "Yes," he said when they broke apart. "God, yes. As many as you want. As many as we're blessed with. Really. Really." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining. "I told you before I want a houseful. I want noise and chaos and sticky fingerprints on everything. I want what I lost when Sarah died, what I thought I'd never have. We can have it." Maggie touched his face. "We're young enough, strong enough. We can build whatever kind of family we want. Together. Together." They returned to the ranch 3 days later. Everything looked the same, the cabin, the barn, the mountains rising behind them, but everything felt different. Fuller. More alive. Eli threw himself into expanding the cabin. Another bedroom, then another. A proper kitchen with a real stove. A porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the house. Maggie worked beside him when she could, holding boards, while he hammered, passing him tools, learning skills she'd never expected to need. And through it all, Rosie grew. She was walking confidently now, toddling around the ranch like she owned it. She'd claimed the chickens as her personal pets and spent hours chasing them around the yard. Her vocabulary expanded daily. Mama, Papa, chicken, horse, no mine, and an emphatic more that she deployed whenever food was involved. "She's going to be a handful when she's older," Martha Redbird observed during one of her visits. "She already is," Maggie said, but she was smiling. The first snow came in November. Maggie stood on the porch watching it fall and felt Eli's arms wrap around her from behind. "First winter together," he said. "Scared?" "No." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "I've got everything I need. Food in the cellar, wood in the shed, a wife I love, and a daughter who thinks I hung the moon. She does worship you. The feeling's mutual." They watched the snow in silence. Then Eli said, "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "That teaching dream you mentioned. The one you had before everything went wrong." Maggie's breath caught. She hadn't talked about that in weeks, had almost forgotten she'd mentioned it at all. "What about it?" "Spring's coming eventually, and there are children in these mountains who've never seen the inside of a schoolhouse. The Redbird grandkids, the Miller children over the ridge, others." "Eli, I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying, if you wanted to start a school here on the ranch, I'd support it. We could build a schoolhouse. Small, just 1 room. You could teach the local children. Give them something their parents can't." Maggie turned in his arms, staring up at him. "You'd do that, build a schoolhouse." "I'd do anything for you." His voice was simple, honest. "You know that by now." The tears came before she could stop them. Not sad tears. Not even happy tears exactly. Something deeper. Something that felt like finally being seen. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd like that more than anything." The schoolhouse was finished by the following June. It was small, just 1 room with a wood stove and a handful of desks, but to Maggie it was perfect. Eli had built it with his own hands, and she'd painted the walls herself a cheerful yellow that matched her wedding dress. 8 children came to the first day of school. The Redbird grandchildren, 3 Miller kids, 2 others from homesteads even further into the mountains. They sat at their desks, scrubbed clean and nervous, while Maggie stood at the front and felt her father's dream come alive inside her. "Good morning," she said. "My name is Mrs. Hollister, and I'm going to teach you to read." She taught them that day and the next and the next. Reading, writing, arithmetic. History and geography. Poetry that made them laugh and stories that made them think. And every afternoon when the children went home, she'd find Eli waiting on the schoolhouse porch with Rosie on his hip. "How'd it go?" he'd ask. "Perfectly," she'd say. And they'd walk home together, a family complete. The years passed. Rosie grew from a toddler to a child, to a young woman with her mother's red hair and her adopted father's quiet strength. She learned to ride before she learned to read, and she could work cattle as well as any ranch hand by the time she was 12. More children came. Thomas born a year after the wedding with Eli's dark hair and Maggie's green eyes. Sarah named for the woman Eli had loved and lost 2 years after that with a laugh that could light up any room. And finally, William named for the brother who'd brought them together, born on the 5th anniversary of the day Eli had ridden up to the auction platform and changed everything. The ranch grew too. More cattle, more horses, more land. The schoolhouse expanded to accommodate more students. The cabin became a proper house with rooms for everyone and a porch where Maggie and Eli sat every evening watching their children play. They faced hardships, harsh winters, sick livestock, a fire that nearly destroyed the barn. But they faced them together, and together they survived. And through it all, Eli kept his promise. He looked at Maggie every day like she was the most important person in the world. He never raised his voice to her, never made her feel small, never let her forget that she was loved and valued and free. "Do you ever regret it?" Maggie asked him one night years into their marriage. "Regret what?" "Everything. Paying all that gold for a stranger, taking on a widow with a baby, giving up your quiet life." Eli pulled her close, his arms strong around her even after all these years. "That was the best money I ever spent," he said. "And you were never a stranger, Maggie. You were my future. I just didn't know it yet." "And the quiet life." He laughed that warm, full laugh she loved so much. "The quiet life was killing me. I just didn't know it until you showed me what living actually felt like." On the 20th anniversary of their wedding, their children threw them a party. The whole territory came, neighbors and friends and former students. The Redbirds gray-haired now but still sharp. Sheriff Carver's son who'd taken over for his father. Even Reverend Peters bent with age but smiling. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Rosie, married now herself with a baby on the way, made a toast that had everyone in tears. Thomas played fiddle while Sarah sang. Little William, not so little anymore at 15, tried to look bored, but couldn't hide his grin. And at the center of it all stood Maggie and Eli, hand in hand, surrounded by the family they'd built together. 20 years, Maggie said. "Can you believe it?" "I can believe every moment." Eli squeezed her hand. "I remember every fight, every laugh, every sleepless night with a crying baby. I remember all of it, Maggie, and I wouldn't trade a single second." "Neither would I." They danced together as the sun set the same way they'd danced on their wedding night, alone on the porch, making up the steps as they went along. "I love you," Eli said. "I love you too." Maggie looked up at him, at this man who'd given her everything she'd never dared to hope for. "Thank you." "For what?" "For riding up that day, for saying those words." She smiled through her tears. "I'll take them. That's what you said. I'll take them. I remember. You took us, a broken widow and a crying baby, and you gave us the world." Eli shook his head. "You gave me the world, Maggie. You and Rosie and every child that came after. I was a dead man walking before you, just going through the motions, waiting for it to be over. And now I can't wait to see what tomorrow brings." He kissed her soft and sweet. "Now I wake up grateful every single day. Now I know what it means to truly live." They swayed together as the stars came out, two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built a life out of nothing but hope and stubbornness and love. 20 years ago, Maggie had stood on an auction platform, certain her life was over. Now she stood in the arms of her husband, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, knowing that her life had only begun the moment a stranger rode up late and said 4 words that changed everything. She'd been sold like property. He'd bought her freedom, and together they'd proven that the darkest moments of a life can become the foundation for its greatest joys. The widow who'd been auctioned off and the cowboy who'd saved her had become something neither of them expected. They'd become a family. They'd become a legacy. They'd become proof that love, real love, chosen love, love that fights and forgives and refuses to give up, could transform anything. Even the most broken hearts, even the deepest pain, even a life that seemed beyond saving. As Maggie looked up at Eli, as their children's laughter filled the air around them, as the stars wheeled overhead, just as they had on that first night so many years ago, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and she would never ever have to stand on an auction block again, because she wasn't property anymore. She was Margaret Hollister, wife, mother, teacher, partner. She was free. She was loved. She was home.